Thank you, Chairman. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and students here. I have two challenges here. First of all, I am the last speaker of the day, and I know you've had a long day, and most of you must be itching to go out of this hall and maybe go and rest so that in the evening you can have your dose of entertainment or meeting up with friends and be free from this academic atmosphere, especially for the students. And secondly, of course, that after all these stalwarts have spoken, all of these people who have held official positions in high positions as high commissioners and ambassadors and of course officials of governments, they have better access and better information and better experience than somebody like me who only observes and writes or maybe goes around in this region and talks about it. But I thought I will concentrate a little bit on the defense or the strategic aspects of what I understand about the region itself. And you've had this discussion in the morning, I think, that whether this should be called Asia Pacific or it should be called Indo-Pacific or it should be called Indo-Asia Pacific. So since I'm not sure myself, I thought I'll put all the three there together and say Indo-Asia Pacific, and let's see how we come to a consensus. But that's something that is being now pushed by the United States, especially if you go to the Pacific Command in Hawaii. And Admiral Harry Harris has been one of the strongest proponents of the Indo-Asia Pacific term to describe the region starting from India and going all the way to the Pacific Ocean, right up to Japan and in fact into the South Pacific islands that also make up part of this Indo-Asia Pacific. So next slide, please. So this is the map. Of course, all of you have studied this, but it's interesting to see how the world is dominated by the oceans, and especially the Indian Ocean, which then extends and goes and meets towards the Pacific Ocean with the South China Sea in between. And this is the region which is now the new center of gravity and the new great game. In the old days, in the 19th century, you had the great game in the Hindu Kush and with Russia and Afghanistan and the British Empire sort of competing with the Russians, where the great game was played. But the great game has now shifted to the Indo-Asia Pacific, and therefore, next slide, please. Next, yeah. Just get the whole thing, yeah. So this is, yeah. So the new focal point, as we can see, is the Indo-Asia Pacific, as I said, starting from India, going right down to Australia. And we have a former Australian High Commissioner sitting here. Australia's interest to their west, especially in what we call East Asia, has been there for quite some time. Their ties with China have been quite durable, but their interest in India has been quite recent. And in that sense, the focus on this region, the Indo-Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, call it whatever you want, has been marked by rise of China in the last 30 odd years now, 28 years, if you take it from 78 or 88 rather, if they really came into their own. And the Asian tigers in the 90s, the economies in Southeast Asia became the focal point of the world, the kind of development, that the scorching pace that they had set in that decade. Of course, they suffered a depression and an economic slowdown in those areas. And subsequent to that phenomenon in Asia, we have India, the India story, post 1991 and especially post 2000s, in the decade between 2004 and 2014, except for the economic slowdown in 2008. So the real story in Indo-Asia Pacific is the economic development that has taken place. The ambassador spoke about ASEAN. ASEAN has set an example of cooperation between nations, cooperation between smaller states, and how they can become an effective bloc. In fact, in Southeast Asia, these are small nations who have come together to form an alliance which gives a heft And as he mentioned, that economy in ASEAN is going to be larger than France and UK. So, but the United States remains a big player in Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific. It has been a naval power in Pacific. It has been a major presence in Southeast Asia. It has propped up nations like Philippines and other allies in Southeast Asia. And it's only in the last 15 years or so, it has turned its attention to India. And therefore, the presence of the United States and the United States Navy, especially the 7th and the 3rd Fleet, 7th and the 6th Fleet here, have been quite substantial. And the competing interests and the rise of China has suddenly now sort of started a competition in Asia and the Indo-Pacific, where the United States is a declining power in the last 5 or 6 years, and the Chinese power is rising. And that's when the competition really has hotted up. India is watching on the sidelines. It is really looking at how it can play a big role in this area. Will it be a swing power? Will it be a balancer? Or will it also have good relations with both the United States and China? That's the question that will be uppermost in every strategic thinker's mind. And India does not need to choose one side really. As I think Dr. Rajamohan said, India can play its role very effectively because we have a geographical advantage. India is like an unsinkable aircraft carrier as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, given our geographical location. And therefore, how do we harness that advantage, that geographical advantage that we have, is to be seen, and proper thinking and proper planning will be required. But competing interests have led to many what I call regional and sub-regional alliances. If you look at the number of alliances in Southeast Asia and South Asia, I think there are a number of alliances, and nations sort of become members of almost all alliances in different ways. There's BIMSTEC, there is SAARC, there is ASEAN, there is ADDM+, there is the East Asian Summit, all kinds of alliances, bilateral, multilateral, and sometimes unilateral alliances have taken place, have been formed in this region. Now, therefore, they are competing, jostling for influence and making their presence felt in this area. Next, please. If you look at the reality today in Indo-Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, the point is the Asia Pacific states, they have, as I said, so many alliances that sometimes if you make a kind of cross reference to these alliances, you will find your circles are intertwining at various places if you make those alliances. The mechanisms are often complementary, but sometimes they also compete. People don't know how to deal with North Korea, for instance, in East Asia. Japan is in East Asia, but it wants to have an alliance with India. So therefore, it's a complex array of multilateral, unilateral, and bilateral alliances. The shift in the economic and the military sphere is tectonic, if you really see. The rise of Indian Navy was always strong, but it is rising. Today it is a Navy with 136 ships. It aims to, and it has an ambitious aim to become a Navy with 200 ships, because India rightly thinks that Indian Ocean is its own backyard, and it needs to be the net security provider in the Indian Ocean, as well as have an influence, if not looming presence in South China Sea. China, on the other hand, keeps on saying that Indian Ocean is not India's ocean, and we have all the right to come to Indian Ocean, which therefore their Navy has been rising, has been developing its capability quite substantially. And therefore, there is a new paradigm and there is a new jostling between two powers. United States still has substantial power. Its Navy is formidable. I mean, it certainly has a very large presence in Asia Pacific and Indo-Pacific. But if you look at the next slide, and what is the grand old bargain that was there in Asia? That is falling apart. The grand old bargain was that China will accept the US presence in Asia and the Indo-Asia Pacific. It will allow US to remain here, prop up some of the smaller nations and have their alliances. Chinese and US in turn will facilitate the Chinese rise. That's something that started in 72 after the famous Nixon visit. And that was supposed to be the grand old bargain. And that bargain was supposed to benefit all other smaller states in both South Asia and Southeast Asia. But that is now falling apart. If you look at the aggressiveness that has been evident in Chinese behavior, and if those of you who keep a watch must have heard how the Chinese have seized an underwater drone of the United States and has kept it. Of course, President-elect Trump says, we don't want it, you can keep it. So that's something which is unpredictable for the Chinese. The Chinese really like predictable behavior. So that remains to be seen, that how now Trump, as president from 20th January, deals with China, and how China responds to it, and how does Taiwan come into it. But the grand Asian bargain, the great Asian bargain, is actually falling apart. And what consequences it will bring, nobody knows. Because that is something, if you had competing interests in Europe in the early 20th century, you had two world wars there. Today, the center of gravity as well as the tension has shifted to Indo-Asia Pacific. If there is a flashpoint in the world, it's going to be in South China Sea or East China Sea or North Korea, or something between Japan and China, or between India and China. One doesn't know. India is increasingly looking alarmed and of course taking steps of the larger Chinese presence in its neighborhood and its extended neighborhood. And it's of course doing some countermeasures, which we will come to in the next slide as we go along. Yes, please. What has China done of late? It is doing its engagement in South Asia, especially around India's periphery, has been rising for quite some time, almost 2 decades now. And you just saw recently what happened in Hambantota. Hambantota, Chinese had, in Sri Lanka, in southern Sri Lanka, the port that is there, Chinese had extended a big loan to the Sri Lankans. And when they couldn't repay that big loan, they have turned that into equity. That is the Chinese way. Deep pockets, checkbook diplomacy, and that's what they have started doing. From Nepal to Maldives, China has actually replicated the ASEAN model, if I can use that term, with your permission, Ambassador. Because that's how the Chinese have operated in ASEAN for a long time. Smaller states, they have given them grants, they have given them help, they have made their presence big in ASEAN. They are replicating that model in South Asia. And that's where the looming presence of the Chinese around India's periphery is there. Pakistan, of course, can sometimes be called, and I like to describe it as the 54th province of China, the way it is going now. Right now, there's no other friends as far as Pakistan is concerned. Even the United States is now withdrawing from helping Pakistan as far as possible. But we'll see how Trump behaves, or Trump deals with Pakistan. But at the moment, Pakistan's only friend, truly only friend, is China. So therefore, we have a problem around our periphery, around our neighborhood. But India has also not been sitting idle, and that's what I want to sort of talk about as far as Indian response is concerned. Can we go to the next slide, please? And this has been India's response, as usual, slow, laborious, and sort of, absolutely lackadaisical to begin with. But with the economic heft and the economic power that India has started gaining post-1991, we have actually, and the Act East policy was also concurrently launched in the decade of the 1990s. India actually now has a major role to play in Southeast Asia. The Indian Navy has become much stronger than before, although Indian Navy planners say that they would like another aircraft carrier, at least, if not 2 more. And from being a small bit player in Southeast Asia, India's engagement has risen many-fold in that region. So there is this string of pearls theory about the Chinese having a string of pearls around India. So can India have a reverse string of pearls against China is the question some people have asked, and we have spoken about it. And the way the Chinese react to slightest change in our behavior from India is something that we should cash in on. When Mongolia wanted some help and India gave help, look at the way the Chinese reacted. Or look at the way the Chinese react when 5 nations came together in 2007 for exercise Malabar. That was Australia, Singapore, Japan, India, and the United States. And they reacted vehemently. They sent out a démarche saying you cannot have this kind of alliance ganging up against the Chinese. And therefore, we have such an issue that the Chinese need to be countered by what we have, the alliance of democracies. And the next and the last slide perhaps is the IOR and the SCS. We have to take into consideration the PLA Navy's rise. It is the story of the decade. India does enjoy the edge, but strengthening the Navy should be our priority. We have to build deterrence. India has to build deterrence along the Himalayas, of course, the land forces. But multilateral alliances in Asia is the move forward. And of course, we have to keep engaging much more with Afghanistan, maybe through Iran, and then see how the other nations react to our presence there. I think that's the final slide I have. What I wanted to say finally is this, that national interest must drive India's policy in Indian Ocean. It should not be that whether we are going towards the US or we are going against the Chinese, whatever is in our national interest should be our priority. And that is the bottom line as far as any policy of a nation is concerned. That's where our strength will lie. If we can recognize that, I think that's the way forward. Thank you very much for your patient listening.